"You're not part of this family, Judy," Clara said, like she was reading it off a list. The words hit me before the door even fully opened, before the warm smell of coffee and cinnamon could reach the porch. It was Mother's Day, bright and mild, maybe 68 degrees, the kind of Illinois morning that makes you believe in second chances, and I was standing there with a bouquet wrapped in brown paper and a peach pie I'd baked at 5 a.m. because I still thought showing up mattered. My hands weren't shaking, not yet, but I felt the pie box tilt slightly as if even cardboard could sense humiliation. Clara's hair was pulled back in that clean, minimalist way she loved, all sharp lines and perfect calm, and behind her I could see my son, Michael, hovering in the hallway like a shadow that couldn't decide where to land. His eyes flicked to the flowers, then to the pie, then away, and I recognized that look, the same look he gave me when he was 9 and had broken a window and wanted me to take the blame before his father came home. I forced my mouth into a smile that probably didn't reach my eyes. "Happy Mother's Day," I said anyway, because old habits are stubborn things. Clara didn't move aside. She stayed planted in the doorway, shoulders squared, as if I were a delivery she hadn't ordered. "We're doing brunch with family," she said, and the way she emphasized that last word made it sting. I glanced past her again and saw the dining room table set with white plates and linen napkins, the kind Clara saved for company, and I noticed 4 place settings, not 3. There was an extra glass, already filled with ice water, catching the light like a little spotlight on an absence. "Michael?" I asked softly, like maybe he'd correct it, like maybe he'd say, "Mom, of course you're coming in, of course you're sitting at the table." He cleared his throat. "Mom, don't make this hard," he murmured, not looking at me, not looking at her, not looking at anything that might require courage. The porch boards felt suddenly too narrow under my shoes. I thought of the years I'd driven 14 miles one way to watch him play high school basketball, the hours I'd spent sewing a tear in his winter coat because money was tight after his father passed, the way I'd stretched a paycheck until it squeaked, the way I'd learned to smile through grief so my boy could have a normal childhood. I was 78 now, my hair silver and curled short because it was easier to manage, my body average and steady, not fragile the way Clara liked to imply when she talked about what's best for Judy. I had worn my favorite wool coat, the soft one that made me feel put together, because you don't arrive to your child's home on a holiday looking like you've already been discarded. Clara's gaze dropped to the pie. "You can leave that," she said, as if I were a caterer, as if I had no right to walk through the door, but my food could. My fingers tightened around the bouquet, paper crinkling. In that tiny sound, I heard years of swallowing my pride. I took one slow breath, the way I used to before walking into my boss's office to ask for a raise, and I looked at my son one more time. "I brought Lily a card," I said, because my granddaughter was 8 and still believed grandmas were permanent. A flicker crossed Clara's face, irritation or calculation, I couldn't tell which. "We'll give it to her," she said quickly, and her hand came out for the envelope the way a cashier reaches for your receipt. I didn't let go. "I'd rather hand it to her myself," I replied, and for the first time that morning, Michael finally met my eyes. There was something in his expression that looked like apology, but apology without action is just a softer kind of dismissal. "She's upstairs," he said, and his voice went thin. "She's busy." Busy. On Mother's Day. I could have argued, could have asked to step inside for 1 minute, could have raised my voice so the neighbors might hear, but I'd learned something after decades of being the steady one in a family. The louder you get, the easier you are to label. Difficult. Emotional. A burden. Clara wanted me to react. I could almost feel her waiting for it. The little tilt of her chin, the calm confidence of someone who'd already practiced the story she would tell afterward. So I did the one thing she didn't plan for. I nodded. "All right," I said. I placed the pie carefully on the porch bench, not because she deserved it, but because I refused to let my work slide or splatter. I tucked Lily's card back into my purse. I turned my bouquet in my hands, watching one pale rose petal tremble in the breeze, and I smiled again, polite and quiet. "Enjoy your brunch," I said, and I meant it the way you mean it when you're closing a door for good. As I walked down the steps, I felt Clara's eyes on my back, and I heard the front door click shut with a finality that didn't match the cheerful wreath hanging on it. My car was parked at the curb, and as I slid into the driver's seat, my hands finally steadied on the steering wheel like they belonged there. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I drove the 12 minutes back to my little house, the one I'd paid off years ago, the one Michael had started referring to lately as that place. Inside, my kitchen still smelled faintly of butter and vanilla. The extra pie tin sat in the sink, rinsed but not put away, and the morning sunlight fell across my table like a quiet witness. I set the bouquet down in an empty vase and stared at it until the beauty felt almost cruel. Then I opened my purse and noticed something I hadn't seen on the porch, a folded piece of paper that wasn't mine, wedged behind my checkbook like it had been placed there on purpose. The paper in my purse was folded into a tight square, creased so sharply it looked like it had been pressed with a ruler. I set my keys on the counter, pulled my checkbook out, and slid the paper into the light under the kitchen window. The heading jumped out first in bold print, too cheerful for what it was: River Glen Senior Living Community, personalized tour confirmation. Beneath it was my name, Judith Caldwell, typed neatly beside a date and time for Tuesday at 2 o'clock, and underneath that, a line that made my stomach go cold. Requested by Michael Caldwell. There was a checkbox marked transportation arranged, and a note that said, please bring identification and any power of attorney documentation if applicable. I read it twice, then a third time, as if the words might change if I stared hard enough. River Glen was not some vague place in a brochure. River Glen was 10 minutes from my home. I had driven past it a dozen times. It was the building people toured when their children started talking about what was practical. I lowered myself into a chair, the same chair my late husband used to sit in when he paid bills, and I felt the air shift around me, as if the house had become too quiet to be safe. I did not remember agreeing to any tour. I did not remember asking anyone to arrange anything. I remembered only Clara at my door, blocking the way with a calm smile, and my son looking past me like he could not bear the shape of my face. I stood up and walked to the living room. On the mantel sat a framed photo of Michael at age 10, missing his 2 front teeth, his arms around my neck, his grin wide enough to crack the world open. I ran a finger along the glass. The boy in that picture would have fought someone for speaking to me the way Clara had. The man in that hallway had barely moved his lips. I turned the tour confirmation over, half expecting it to be a mistake, but the back was blank except for a faint smudge of printer ink. No apology. No explanation. Just a plan made without me. My phone buzzed on the table, and for a heartbeat, I hoped it was Michael calling to say he was sorry. It was a notification from a social media app one barely used, the one Lily had set up for me last year, so I could see family photos without waiting for someone to remember to send them. I tapped it, and there it was, bright as daylight. Clara had posted a Mother's Day picture. A white tablecloth, the same dining table I had seen through the doorway, plates arranged like a magazine spread, and in the center a vase of pink tulips that I recognized because I had once taught Michael how to cut stems at an angle so flowers lasted longer. In the caption, Clara had written, celebrating the women who raised us, and tagged her own mother, who sat smiling at the head of the table, wearing a pearl necklace and holding Lily on her lap. Michael stood behind them with his hand on Lily's shoulder, smiling just enough to look presentable. There were 4 place settings in the photo, just as I had seen, and none of them were for me. I scrolled to the next image. Clara's hand held a card that said, Best Mom Ever, and beside it was a gift bag with tissue paper in soft neutral colors, the kind Clara liked, the kind that said effort without mess. My throat tightened, not because of the picture, but because of the care in the staging. This was not a last-minute decision. This was a holiday plan with me edited out. I set the phone down slowly, like it might burn my palm. I went back to the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept my mail. I had not touched it that morning because I had been focused on pies and flowers and being gracious. Now I sorted through envelopes with a different kind of attention. Water bill, grocery circular, a bank statement for an account I rarely used, the one my husband and I opened years ago and left sitting quietly, like a spare room you keep tidy just in case. I tore it open and skimmed the numbers. My balance was still there, but 2 lines caught my eye, not because they were large, but because they were unfamiliar. Online access updated, and authorized user added. My hand froze over the paper. I had not added anyone. I had not updated anything. I walked to the desk in the corner of the living room, opened my laptop, and typed in the bank's website with the careful patience of someone who has learned that panic makes mistakes. My password did not work. I tried again. Wrong. I tried a 3rd time slower. Wrong. A small message appeared. Too many attempts. Please contact customer service. The room felt smaller. I could hear the refrigerator hum, steady and indifferent, and outside a lawn mower started up down the street like nothing had changed. I picked up the River Glen confirmation again and stared at the words requested by Michael Caldwell. I thought about Clara's outstretched hand for Lily's card, the way she had wanted control over even a piece of paper meant for a child. I thought about Michael's thin voice saying, "Do not make this hard." It was not just about a seat at a table. It was about access and choices and paperwork with my name already typed in. I folded the River Glen page back into its sharp square, slid it into an envelope, and wrote the date on the front in black ink. Then I opened my calendar and wrote something else beneath: Tuesday at 2 o'clock, something I had not written in years. Appointment, bank, in person. By Monday morning the air had that damp spring smell that clung to my wool coat, and I drove the 7 miles to my bank with the River Glen paper in a plain folder on the passenger seat, like it deserved a seatbelt. The parking lot was already half full, and I watched a young couple laugh as they stepped out of their car, their arms full of coffee and optimism, as if money was just something you tapped on a screen. Inside, the lobby was cool and bright, all polished tile and soft music that tried too hard to be calming. I sat in a chair near a potted plant, folded my hands over my purse, and told my face to stay gentle. The last thing I needed was to be remembered as the old woman who caused a scene. While I waited, my mind did what it always did when something hurt. It went hunting for older wounds, lining them up like receipts. Last Christmas, Clara had texted me that they were keeping it small, just immediate family, and I had stared at that phrase for a long time, because I was the one who had made Michael immediate family in the first place. I still baked my usual cinnamon rolls, 2 dozen, and drove over anyway with a tin wrapped in a towel to keep them warm. The door had opened to the smell of turkey and laughter, and Clara had taken the tin from my hands without inviting me in right away, saying she was still cleaning and it might be better if I waited in the car for a few minutes. I waited 12 minutes in the cold, watching my breath fog the windshield, until Michael finally came out and said they had already started eating, but I could come in for dessert. Inside, there were coats piled on the couch that were not mine, and a second turkey platter in the kitchen like extra guests were expected. Clara had smiled the whole time, the kind of smile that made everyone else believe I was imagining things. Then there was Lily's birthday in February, when I bought a little watercolor set and a new sweater in her favorite shade of blue. Clara sent me the party time, 2 in the afternoon, and I arrived early because I always arrived early. The driveway was empty. I called Michael, and he sounded surprised to hear from me, like my name popping up on his phone was an inconvenience. He said they changed plans last minute and were at an indoor trampoline place across town. And when I got there, the staff told me the party room was already closing because the time had been booked for a shorter slot. I stood at the edge of the crowd holding a gift bag while Lily ran past me in socks, and when she finally saw me she shouted "Grandma," and hugged my waist so hard I almost cried. Clara appeared immediately, slid her arm around Lily's shoulders, and said, "Oh good, you made it," like I was late on purpose. Michael kissed my cheek, distracted, and then drifted away to help with pizza. I remembered all those small moments now, not because I wanted to be bitter, but because I needed to be honest. A pattern is just a pattern until someone tries to use it to take something from you. A woman in a navy blazer called my name, Judith Caldwell, and I followed her to a small office where a glass bowl of mints sat untouched on the desk. She introduced herself as Ms. Ramirez, the branch manager, and asked how she could help. I placed my folder on the desk and said, "I cannot access my online account, and I believe someone has changed my settings without my permission." My voice sounded steady, almost polite, and that steadiness felt like armor. Ms. Ramirez typed on her keyboard, asked for my identification, and I watched her eyes flick across the screen with the kind of professional neutrality that told me she had seen 1,000 variations of family trouble. She said an authorized user had been added 4 days ago, and online access was updated the same day. She did not say the name out loud at first, so I asked. She turned the monitor slightly so I could see it, and there it was in clean black letters. Michael Caldwell, authorized access pending confirmation, and beneath that a phone number that was not mine. My throat tightened, but I kept my hands still. I asked for a printed activity log, dates and times, and any documents connected to the change. Ms. Ramirez nodded and said she could print what was available, and she asked if I wanted to freeze online changes until I completed a security review. I said yes. Then I asked for a verbal password, something no one could guess, and I chose a phrase my husband used to say when we drove past Lake Michigan at sunrise, a sentence nobody in my son's house had ever heard. Ms. Ramirez looked at me for a moment and then softened her voice. She said, "Sometimes family thinks they are helping." I smiled a little, because it was kinder than the truth, and I said, "Sometimes family thinks they own you." When I left the bank, my folder was thicker with papers, and the sky had turned the color of steel. I sat in my car, placed the printed log on my lap, and stared at the date again. 4 days ago, Clara had been planning brunch. 4 days ago, my son had been planning my future without me. The printed activity log sat on my passenger seat, like a passenger who refused to look away. I did not drive home right away. I drove past my usual turn, went 1 more mile, and pulled into the grocery store parking lot, because it was familiar, because it gave me an excuse to sit still without feeling ridiculous. I parked at the far edge where shopping carts did not clang too close, turned off the engine, and read the page again. Added authorized user. Updated phone number. Initiated online access. Each line had a time stamp, neat and unforgiving. It was not a guess. It was not a misunderstanding. It was someone touching my life like it was a set of settings on a screen. I could have called Michael then. I could have pressed his name and demanded an explanation, but I knew how that conversation would go because I had heard it before in smaller forms. He would sigh and say he was trying to help. Clara would take the phone and speak in that calm voice that made me sound irrational. If I raised my voice, they would call me emotional. If I cried, they would call me unstable. If I stayed quiet, they would call it agreement. There was only one way to keep my footing, and that was to understand the game before I moved another piece. So I sat there and let my memory rewind, not for nostalgia, but for evidence. I saw Clara on the day Michael first brought her to my house, 5 years ago. She arrived with a bottle of sparkling water and a small bouquet wrapped in twine, the kind of gift that looked thoughtful without being personal. She had smiled at my living room like she was assessing square footage, and when I offered iced tea, she said she did not do sugar, like it was a moral stance. Michael had watched her with that eager face men get when they believe love will reorganize their whole lives for the better. That afternoon, Clara asked me where I kept my important papers, just casually, as if she was curious. I laughed and said, "In a safe place," and she laughed too, but her eyes did not. I remembered how quickly she learned which neighbors mattered, which women in the community had influence, and how she leaned into them with perfect manners. She never argued with me in front of anyone. She saved her sharpness for quiet moments, for kitchens and hallways and text messages that could be deleted. She would say, "We are just worried about you, Judy," and it sounded kind until you realized worry was her favorite tool. Worry could justify anything. Worry could excuse taking control. Worry could paint me as a problem without calling me one. In the months after Michael married her, my phone calls started going unanswered, and when I asked why, Michael said they were busy, work was stressful, Clara had a lot on her plate. If I stopped by to drop off soup, Clara would open the door just enough to block the view, smile, and say, "Oh, you should have texted first." If I did text, she would respond 2 hours later with, "We are out, maybe another time." It was always another time. I remembered the first time she used the word boundaries with me, like I was a stranger who needed rules, not the woman who raised the man she slept beside. Michael repeated that word afterward like it was a shield. "Boundaries, Mom. Respect our boundaries." He never noticed that the boundary always moved in one direction, away from me. I looked down at the log again and felt something settle in my chest, not anger, but clarity. This was not just a cold holiday. This was a campaign, slow and quiet, designed to make me doubt my place until I surrendered it. The River Glen tour confirmation had not appeared by accident. Someone had printed it, folded it, and placed it in my purse like a message. "We are already deciding." I thought of the extra place setting in the dining room. 4 plates. 1 missing chair. It was not a mistake. It was rehearsal. I took my phone and opened my messages with Michael. The last text from him was 2 weeks earlier. "Hey Mom, can you send me a copy of your insurance card? Just in case." I had sent a photo without thinking, because mothers answer when their children ask. Beneath it he had written, "Thanks. Clara is organizing everything. You will feel so much better once we get it all streamlined." Streamlined. The word looked harmless on a screen, but now I could taste what it really meant. Streamline meant I would be reduced to a file, a schedule, a signature. I opened my email and searched for River Glen. Nothing. I searched for senior living. Nothing. They had done it without putting it in writing where I could find it easily. Then I remembered something else, something small Clara had said at Lily's birthday when I asked what Lily wanted to be when she grew up. Clara had laughed and said, "Probably a lawyer. She already loves paperwork." At the time it sounded like a joke. Now it sounded like a preview. I sat up straighter, took a pen from my purse, and wrote 3 words on the corner of the activity log. Dates, names, proof. Then I wrote a 4th, patience. Because if Clara thought I would stumble into her plan like a confused old woman, she had misjudged the kind of quiet I came from. I started the engine and drove home, not to mourn, but to prepare. That evening, I did not light a candle or put on the television. I moved through my house with a purpose that felt unfamiliar and steady, the way you move when you are packing for a storm you can see coming. I set my folder of bank papers on the dining table, spread them out like a quilt, and placed a yellow notepad beside them. The pen made a soft clicking sound when I uncapped it, and that little sound felt louder than it should have. I wrote Michael at the top of the page, then Clara, then River Glen. Under Michael, I wrote the time stamp from the log, and under Clara, I wrote the word pattern, because she never left fingerprints in the obvious places. I went to the small fireproof box in my closet, the one I kept behind winter blankets, and I pulled out my documents one by one. My deed, my insurance policies, my will from 8 years ago, and the binder where my late husband had tucked every warranty and receipt like he thought order could keep trouble away. I did not have a power of attorney on file, which was a relief, but I did have something else that made my stomach twist, a blank form from our old estate planning packet, the one Michael had once asked about after his father died. Back then he had been young and scared and grateful, and I had told him we would handle things when the time was right. Now someone had decided the time was right without asking me. I sat down and forced myself to breathe slowly. I did not want to become the kind of person who saw betrayal in every shadow. I wanted facts. So I opened my phone and scrolled back through my messages like I was reading a diary I did not remember writing. There it was, a thread of small requests that had sounded harmless at the time. Clara asking for a copy of my driver license because she was putting me on their emergency contact list. Michael asking for my Medicare number because he wanted to help me find a better supplemental plan. Clara texting, "Can you send a photo of your signature?" Just to match records for the HOA, they flagged something. I remembered taking a picture of my signature on a scrap of paper, annoyed but trusting, because it was easier to comply than to argue. My throat tightened as I stared at that message. It was not just that they wanted to help. They wanted materials. Pieces. Enough pieces to assemble a version of me that signed things without being present. I set the phone down and looked at the family photos on the wall. Michael holding Lily at the zoo, Clara beside them with sunglasses and a perfect smile. I wondered how many times she had practiced that smile while moving my life around behind it. My landline rang, the old one I kept because it still worked when the power flickered. The sound startled me. I let it ring twice before picking up, and I kept my voice calm. "Hello." Michael said, "Hey Mom, I was just checking in." His tone was careful, like he was walking across thin ice, and I could hear dishes clinking in the background, Clara moving around their kitchen. I said, "I am fine." There was a pause, and then he asked if I had a nice day. The question felt almost absurd, but I answered the way I always had, politely, evenly, as if manners could protect me. I said, "I spent some time getting organized." He exhaled like he was relieved. "Good," he said. "Clara and I have been talking about ways to make things easier for you." The word easier landed like a weight. I said nothing. He kept going, filling the silence, explaining that they worried about me driving in winter, that my house was a lot to maintain, that it might be nice to have more community, more support, more structure. He sounded like he had memorized a brochure. I looked down at the River Glen confirmation on my table and pressed my fingertip against the paper until it bent slightly. I said, "Michael, did you schedule a tour for me?" The clinking stopped in the background. His breath caught. "Mom," he said, "it is not a big deal. It is just information. We just want you to see options." I could hear Clara now, faint but close, her voice sliding into the edge of the call, as if she was standing right beside him. "Judy," she said, "we are only thinking ahead. You get confused sometimes. We are being responsible." Confused. The word was casual, almost sweet, like she was talking about a misplaced sweater. I felt my body go still. I did not argue. I did not shout. I said, I did not ask for a tour. Michael said, we thought you would be grateful. Clara added, it is better when family makes decisions together. Family. The same word she had used to keep me outside their door. I held the receiver and stared at the notepad where I had written patience. I said, I am going to handle my own decisions. There was a sharp inhale on the line. Michael said, Mom, you are being stubborn. Clara said, we are trying to keep you safe. And then, as if she could not help herself, she added, we cannot have you making choices that affect us later. There it was. Not safety. Not love. Us. I let a bead of silence sit between us, long enough for her words to settle where they belonged. Then I said, thank you for your concern. I will call you when I am ready to talk. Michael started to say something, but I hung up gently, the way you close a book you finally understand. My hands did not shake. I wrote one more line on my notepad under Clara's name. She admitted it. And then I opened my laptop and searched for an estate attorney within 5 miles. One who offered consultations, one who did not know my family, one who would see an old woman as a client, not a problem. The next morning I wore my plain gray coat and drove 6 miles to a small office above a bakery, where the hallway smelled like warm bread and lemon cleaner, and the receptionist spoke in a voice that treated me like a person instead of a problem. The sign on the door said Larkin and Associates, Estate Planning, and the letters were modest, not flashy, like the kind of place that did not need to advertise trust because it earned it. I sat in a waiting chair with my folder on my lap and listened to the soft click of a wall clock counting out seconds that suddenly mattered. When Ms. Larkin came to the door, she was in her 40s with calm eyes and no impatience in her posture. She shook my hand firmly and said, Mrs. Caldwell, come on back. Her office was simple, a bookshelf, a small lamp, a framed photo of a lake, and a desk that was clear enough to tell me she liked order. I did not start with feelings. I started with facts. I placed the River Glen tour confirmation on her desk, then the printed bank activity log, then a page where I had written dates and names in my careful handwriting. Ms. Larkin read silently for a moment, and the only sound was the faint hum of an air vent. Then she looked up and asked, did you authorize any of these changes? I said no. I watched her face shift, not into shock, but into focus. She asked if I had signed anything recently, if I had given anyone copies of my identification, if anyone had access to my mail or my purse. I answered honestly, and each answer felt like lifting a stone and seeing what lived underneath it. I told her about the harmless requests, the insurance card, the signature photo, the way Clara always said it was for organizing. Ms. Larkin nodded once, then slid a notepad toward herself and began writing. She did not call my son a bad man or my daughter-in-law a villain. She simply said, you need to secure your accounts, limit access, and update your estate plan in a way that reflects your wishes, not anyone else's convenience. Hearing that sentence out loud did something to my chest. It was not relief. It was permission. She explained trusts and beneficiaries in plain language, and she asked who I wanted protected and under what conditions. I told her about Lily, my granddaughter, and how I wanted her future supported without turning my life into a prize. Ms. Larkin said we could create a simple trust with clear instructions, and she recommended naming a neutral trustee, not family, someone who would follow paperwork instead of feelings. That idea felt strange and steady at the same time, like choosing a new lock after a break-in. She also suggested I change my medical decision-maker to someone I trusted, and she asked if I had a close friend or a cousin who was reliable. I thought of my friend Marlene from church, the one who brought casseroles when my husband died and never asked what she would get in return. I said her name. Ms. Larkin wrote it down. When we finished, she set an appointment for the following day to sign documents, and she told me to keep everything quiet until my protections were in place. Quiet was something I could do. I had been quiet for decades. The difference now was that my quiet had direction. I left her office with my folder heavier and my steps lighter, and I sat in my car for a minute with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the bakery downstairs where people came and went, living ordinary lives, unaware of how quickly family could turn into a negotiation. My phone rang as I pulled out of the parking lot. Michael. I let it ring twice before answering, because I wanted him to hear that I was not waiting by the phone anymore. His voice was bright in a forced way. Mom, he said, I was thinking about yesterday, and I want to make sure you are okay. I said, I am fine, Michael. He paused, then tried again. Clara feels bad about how things came across. The word came across told me he was already rewriting it. I said, what do you need, Michael? Another pause. Then he said, we just want to talk about next steps. We have that tour on Tuesday, and it would be good if we all went together. I kept my eyes on the road and my voice even. I said, I did not ask for a tour. He sighed. The same sigh he used when he wanted me to soften. Mom, he said, you are taking this the wrong way. It is just planning. Planning for what? I asked, and I heard Clara in the background, a low whisper that still managed to sound in control. Michael said, planning so you do not have to worry later. I said, I have already handled my bank access issue. There was a quick silence, like a dropped glass that had not hit the floor yet. Michael said, what do you mean? I said, I mean the authorized user you added, and the phone number change. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. The line went quiet, and then Michael spoke carefully. Mom, he said, that was just to help you. You forget passwords. Clara suggested it. Clara. There it was again, tucked behind his name like a shield. I said, Michael, send me every document you used to make those changes. He started to protest, and Clara's whisper sharpened, but I did not let them steer. I said, I am keeping records now. Another silence. Then Michael said, okay, Mom. I could hear him swallowing. I said, thank you. I will see you when I am ready. When I ended the call, my hands were still steady, but my heart felt like it was finally catching up, not with fear, but with the reality that my son had chosen comfort over truth, and my daughter-in-law had mistaken my years of patience for permission. That afternoon the house felt too neat, like it was holding its breath. I made tea and did not drink it. I washed a plate that was already clean. I kept moving because if I sat down, I might start remembering Michael as a boy instead of Michael as a man who had typed my name into a plan without asking me first. At 3 o'clock, I opened my blinds an inch and watched the street. A delivery truck stopped 2 houses down, a dog barked, and somewhere a child laughed. Ordinary sounds, the kind that used to convince me everything was fine. I went back to the dining table and laid out my papers again, but this time I added something new. A notebook with a hard cover, the kind I used to keep when my husband was sick and doctors gave instructions too fast. On the first page, I wrote one sentence in steady ink. I will not argue with people who benefit from misunderstanding me. Then I made a list of what I knew and what I did not know. I knew Clara had my signature photo. I knew Michael had been added as an authorized user. I knew a senior living tour was scheduled in my name. I did not know what else they had tried, and I did not know what they were telling other people. That part mattered, because Clara did not just move paperwork, she moved opinions. By 5 o'clock my phone chimed with a text from a number I did not recognize. It was a photo of Lily holding a craft project, glittery paper hearts taped to a stick, her grin wide, and missing one tooth. Under it was a message. Hi Judy, Lily wanted you to see this. Happy Mother's Day weekend. It was signed, Clara. The timing was too perfect. A soft touch after a hard shove, a little picture to make me feel guilty for protecting myself. I stared at Lily's face until my eyes blurred, and I felt the familiar pull to forgive, to smooth, to pretend love would fix what boundaries could not. Then I noticed something in the corner of the photo, half cut off. A stack of papers on their counter, and on the top page I could just make out a bold heading, Financial Power of Attorney. My chest tightened. The photo was meant to soften me, but it had shown me exactly what I needed. Clara had sent proof without realizing it. I did not respond. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote, Clara is already preparing documents. Evidence in photo, Tuesday. Then I called Ms. Larkin's office and left a calm message with her receptionist. I received new information. I will bring it tomorrow. My voice did not shake, and that alone felt like progress. That night, I slept lightly, not from fear, but from vigilance. I woke before sunrise to the soft gray light that makes every kitchen look honest. I dressed, ate a piece of toast, and drove back to Ms. Larkin's office. She listened while I explained the text and showed her the photo. She zoomed in on her phone and nodded once. She said, good. We will be ready. We went over the documents I would sign that day, and when I held the pen, I felt my hand hesitate for a second, not because I doubted my decision, but because grief is strange. It can feel like betrayal even when you are only protecting yourself. I signed anyway. My name looked the same as it always had, careful and clear, and that mattered. After I left, I stopped at my bank again and added another layer of security. Then I drove home and sat at my kitchen table with my notebook open. I thought about Michael calling me stubborn. I thought about Clara saying they could not have me making choices that affect them later. They had spoken as if my life was a problem they needed to solve, and the more I replayed it, the more I understood something that used to scare me. They were not going to stop because they felt bad. They were going to stop only if they could not win. In the late afternoon, Michael called again. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message, trying to sound casual, saying Tuesday was still on, that it would be nice if I came, that Lily had made something for me. He ended with, "Love you, Mom," but it sounded like a phrase he used out of habit, not an action he lived. I did not call back. Instead, I drove to a small print shop a mile from my house and asked the young man behind the counter to print 3 copies of the bank activity log and 1 enlarged copy of the River Glen confirmation. He smiled politely, unaware that he was helping an old woman build a wall against her own family. On the way home, I stopped at a florist and bought myself 1 single white rose. Not a bouquet, not a show, just 1 rose, simple and stubborn. I put it in a glass by the sink. Then I went to my closet, pulled out my best navy dress, the one that fit comfortably and made my shoulders look straight, and I hung it on the door where I could not ignore it. If Clara wanted a performance, I would give her one, but not the one she expected. Mine would be quiet. Mine would be documented. And when Tuesday came, I would walk into that conversation the way I walked into every hard thing I had survived, not asking permission to exist. Tuesday arrived with a sky the color of wet concrete, and I dressed as if I were going to a meeting that mattered, because I was. The navy dress fell to my knees, the fabric smooth and steady, and when I buttoned my coat, I felt my shoulders settle into place like they remembered how to be strong. I poured coffee into a travel mug even though my hands did not need it. Then I set it back on the counter because I did not want to carry anything extra. I carried only my folder, thick with paper, and my notebook, and the single white rose I had bought for myself stayed by the sink like a quiet witness. At 1:45 I drove the 12 minutes to River Glen, not because I intended to tour, but because I wanted to see what they had set up in my name. The building looked exactly like it always had from. The road, clean brick, manicured shrubs, windows that reflected the gray sky in a way that made everything seem softer than it was. I parked near the entrance and sat for a moment, watching people come and go. A man helped an older woman out of a car, speaking gently. A staff member held a door open and smiled. It all looked kind, and that was the danger of it. Kindness can be used like a cover. At 1:58 my phone buzzed. A text from Michael, "We are inside. Come to the lobby." Clara added a second message from his phone seconds later. "Try to be open-minded today." I did not respond. I took my folder, stepped out into the cool air, and walked in. The lobby smelled like citrus cleaner and fresh flowers, the same combination every place uses to imply safety. A receptionist sat behind a desk, and when she saw me, she smiled brightly. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, "we have been expecting you." The words landed with a strange weight. Expecting me, like I belonged to a schedule. I nodded and asked for the person running the tour. The receptionist pointed to a seating area where Michael and Clara were already waiting, and Lily sat between them swinging her feet in little white sneakers. Lily's face lit up when she saw me, and she jumped up, running the few steps toward me like a child who did not understand adult cruelty yet. "Grandma," she said, throwing her arms around my waist. Her hug was warm and real, and for a moment it almost cracked my composure. I wrapped my arms around her gently and breathed in the smell of her shampoo. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. Michael stood, his smile strained, and Clara rose more slowly, her expression arranged like a vase of flowers, pretty and controlled. "Judy," Clara said, as if this was a casual outing, as if I had not been shut out of their home days earlier. Michael tried to take my folder, reaching for it like it belonged with the rest of the paperwork. I shifted it slightly to keep it in my own hands. His fingers hovered, then dropped. "We were early," he said. "The tour guide will be here any minute." Clara tilted her head toward Lily. "Show Grandma what you made, honey." Lily pulled a little paper heart wand from her bag, the one I had seen in the photo, and she held it up proudly. I smiled at her and told her it was beautiful. Clara watched my face, waiting for softness, waiting for guilt, waiting for me to melt into gratitude and forget everything else. I did not give her that. I stayed kind to Lily, but I kept my spine straight. A woman in a name tag approached with a clipboard and introduced herself as Denise. She spoke warmly about community and activities and safety features, and I listened as if I were any other prospective resident. Denise asked if I had any questions before we started. Michael jumped in immediately. "Mom sometimes forgets things," he said, like he was talking about a misplaced grocery list. "We just want her to have support." Clara nodded, adding, "We have been thinking ahead. It is better to plan before there is a crisis." Crisis. I looked at their faces and felt something almost surreal. They were saying these words in a public lobby, in front of staff, in front of my granddaughter, as if their story was already official. Denise smiled sympathetically at them, then at me. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, "what are you looking for in a community?" That was the moment Clara expected me to play my role, to sound unsure, to sound old, to let them answer for me. I met Denise's eyes and said, "I am not looking for a community." Denise blinked, still smiling but confused. Michael's jaw tightened. Clara's smile flickered for a fraction of a second before it returned. I continued in the same calm tone. "I did not request this tour. I did not authorize anyone to schedule it." Denise's clipboard dipped slightly. Michael said, "Mom, please, do not do this here." Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice as if she was being considerate. "Judy," she said, "we are just trying to help. You are making this embarrassing." Embarrassing. The word was meant to make me small. I turned my folder so the top page was visible and said, "What is embarrassing is scheduling appointments in my name without my consent and adding yourselves to my financial accounts without permission." Denise's eyes widened, and her professional smile vanished. Michael's face drained of color in a way I had never seen. Clara's posture stiffened, and for the first time her calm looked like effort. Denise said softly, "Mrs. Caldwell, would you like to step into a private office?" I nodded. Lily looked up at me, confused, her small hand still holding the paper heart wand. I crouched slightly and smoothed her hair. "Sweetheart," I said, "go sit with your dad for a minute. Grandma needs to talk to the grown-ups." Michael reached for Lily automatically, but his eyes stayed on me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. Clara opened her mouth to speak, then closed it, because the lobby had witnesses now, and she could not control a room full of strangers the way she controlled a kitchen. Denise led us toward a side office, and as we walked, I realized something steady and surprising. For the first time since that porch door clicked shut, I was no longer outside. I was inside the truth, and they were the ones scrambling for a seat. Denise's office was small and bright, with a round table that looked like it was meant to soften hard conversations. A framed poster on the wall said something about dignity and choice, and I almost laughed at the timing. Denise closed the door gently, not like she was shutting anyone out, but like she was creating a space where words could not be twisted by an audience. Michael stood near the door as if he might leave at any second. Clara sat immediately, folding her hands in her lap, her posture perfect, her face composed the way people look when they believe composure can replace accountability. Denise glanced between us and said, "Mrs. Caldwell, I want to be clear. You are not obligated to tour or enroll. This appointment is yours." I nodded. "Thank you," I said, and placed my folder on the table. The sound of paper meeting wood was quiet, but it felt like a gavel. I pulled out the River Glen confirmation first and slid it toward Denise. "This was placed in my purse without my knowledge," I said. "It was scheduled in my name, requested by my son, without my consent." Denise's eyes moved over the page, and her mouth tightened slightly. Michael cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, "we were just trying to gather information." Clara's voice followed smoothly, like she had been waiting for her turn. "Judy," she said, "you forget what you agree to sometimes. We were being proactive." I turned my head slowly and looked at her. "Clara," I said, "do not speak for my memory." My tone was not sharp, but it was final. She blinked once, and for the first time her gaze flickered away. Denise said, "I understand." "And the financial concern you mentioned in the lobby." I opened to the printed bank log and set it on the table. "This shows changes made to my account," I said. "An authorized user added and my phone number updated." I did not do it. I paused, then added, "I confirmed it in person with my branch manager." Michael's face shifted, a ripple of panic he tried to smooth over. He leaned forward. "Mom," he said, "that was me, but it was not bad. I was helping. You could not get into your account. I asked you before." I kept my voice calm. "You did not ask me, I said. You told me after. There is a difference. Denise's eyes went to Clara, then back to Michael. Mr. Caldwell, she said, our policy is very clear. We require direct consent from the resident for any services, and we encourage financial independence. If there is a concern about exploitation, we take it seriously. The word exploitation hung in the air like a curtain dropping. Clara's chin lifted. That is dramatic, she said softly. We are family. I did not raise my voice. Family does not mean ownership, I said. Michael's shoulders sagged slightly, and for a second he looked younger, like a man who had gotten in too deep and did not know how to climb out without admitting he fell. Denise asked if I wanted to proceed with the tour or cancel. I said cancel. Denise nodded, reached for her clipboard, and made a note. She asked if I wanted River Glen to document that the appointment was scheduled without my consent. I said yes. Michael started to speak, but I held up a hand, not aggressive, just controlled. Michael, I said, you do not get to manage my life because it is easier for you. Clara made a small sound, almost a laugh. Easier, she repeated, as if I was being unreasonable. Judy, she said, you are 78. You live alone. Things happen. We need to plan for when you cannot keep up. I looked at her and felt an odd calm. Because she had finally said the part she usually hid. We need to plan for when you cannot keep up. That sentence was not about me. It was about them. Their schedule. Their comfort. Their fear of inconvenience. I said, if something happens, I have my own plan. Clara's eyes narrowed just enough to be visible. What plan? She asked, and there it was, the hunger behind the polite mask. Michael glanced at her quickly, then back at me. Mom, he said, what do you mean? I reached into my folder and pulled out a sealed envelope, not because I wanted to show it off, but because I wanted to mark the moment. I placed it on the table and rested my hand on top of it. This is my updated estate plan and medical directive, I said. It is complete. It names a trustee and a decision-maker who are not you. Clara's composure cracked like thin ice. Not us, she said, and her voice sharpened. Michael's eyes widened. Mom, he whispered, why would you do that? I did not flinch. Because you made decisions without me, I said. Because you tried to add yourselves to my accounts. Because you scheduled a tour for me like I was a package to be delivered. Denise sat very still, listening, her expression professional but firm. Clara leaned back, lips pressed tight. This is unbelievable, she said, as if my self-protection was the offense. Michael looked between us, caught in the space where love and convenience fight. I watched him and realized the hardest truth was not Clara. Clara was predictable. The hardest truth was my son's silence when it mattered. Denise cleared her throat gently. Mrs. Caldwell, she said, would you like us to escort you back to the lobby and note in our file that no further appointments are to be made without your direct confirmation? I said, yes, please. Then I stood, gathered my papers, and looked at Michael one last time. I did not say I forgive you. I did not say I hate you. I said, I raised you to be a man who protects his mother, not a man who hands her over. And for the first time, Michael did not have an answer. Denise walked us back through the lobby as if she was escorting a guest of honor, not an older woman who had just discovered her own life was being negotiated. Michael trailed a step behind me, silent, while Clara kept her chin lifted and her mouth set in a line that tried to pass for dignity. Lily sat on a lobby chair swinging her feet, watching faces like she was trying to read a language she had never been taught. I stopped beside her, knelt carefully, and kissed the top of her head. I told her I loved her, and I promised I would call her soon. Michael reached for her hand, but his eyes stayed fixed on me, wide and uncertain. Clara did not touch Lily at all in that moment, as if affection was something she only used when it served her. Outside, the air felt cooler than when I arrived. I walked to my car without rushing, set my folder on the passenger seat, and closed the door with a soft click. My phone lit up before I even started the engine, an email alert from the bank that made my stomach tighten. Your online access request has been initiated. If this was not you, contact us immediately. I stared at the screen, then at my own hands, steady on the steering wheel, and I realized they were still trying, even after being exposed. I called the bank from the parking lot and spoke to a fraud specialist who asked calm questions and took careful notes. She confirmed that someone had attempted to reset access using the same non-matching phone number that had been added days earlier. When she asked if I suspected a family member, I said yes without hesitation, because at this point denial would only protect the wrong people. She gave me a case number, explained the next steps, and told me to keep all communications in writing when possible. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat for a moment listening to the faint sound of traffic on the road, thinking about how quickly love could turn into logistics. By the time I got home, my landline rang again. Michael. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. His voice sounded tight. Mom, he said, can we talk tonight? In person. Clara wants to clear the air. The way he said Clara once told me who had written the script. I said, what does she want me to sign? There was a pause so long I could hear his breathing. He said, nothing, Mom. We just want to be on the same page. Same page. I looked at the stack of papers on my table and almost smiled. I said, I will come for 1 hour. I will not discuss anything in front of Lily. If you have documents, have them ready. His voice lifted with relief, as if he believed he had regained control. He gave me a time and an address I already knew by heart. At 6:30, I put on my coat again and carried my folder like it was part of my body. Their house smelled like roasted chicken and lemon, and the dining room table was set with those same linen napkins, the ones that made everything feel like a performance. Clara greeted me with a smile that was too smooth, too rehearsed. Judy, she said, as if we were friends. Michael hovered near the kitchen doorway, looking exhausted. Lily ran to hug me, and I hugged her back, holding her a second longer than usual, because I needed something real before the talking began. Clara told Lily it was bath time and guided her upstairs with a sweetness that did not reach her eyes. The moment Lily's footsteps disappeared, Clara's shoulders changed. She reached under a stack of placemats and pulled out a folder, crisp and thick. She slid it across the table toward me the way a salesperson slides a contract. We drafted a simple care plan, she said, just to protect everyone. Michael sat down heavily, staring at the wood grain like it might give him answers. I opened the folder slowly. On top was a document titled Durable Power of Attorney, and beneath it was a page labeled Real Estate Authorization, and beneath that was a printed listing estimate with photos of my house, my front porch, my living room window, even the flower bed I weeded every Saturday. Clara watched my face as if she expected fear. Instead, I felt something settle into place, the last piece of the pattern clicking. So this is what it is, I said quietly. Clara kept her voice calm. Judy, she said, you live alone. If something happens, we have to act fast. Selling your house would pay for the best suite, and Michael and I could manage everything. Michael flinched at the word selling, but he did not deny it. I turned a page and saw a blank line waiting for my signature. My signature, the one I had once photographed for her because she said it was for records. I set the folder down and looked at Michael. Did you know she had your mother's house priced out for sale? I asked. His throat bobbed. He said, we just talked about options. Clara leaned in, her voice sharpening for the first time. You are making this dramatic, she said. We are trying to be responsible. I reached into my own folder and pulled out 2 things, the bank activity log and a printed close-up of Clara's Mother's Day text photo, enlarged so the heading Financial Power of Attorney was impossible to miss. I placed them beside her folder, aligning the edges neatly, as if this were a meeting with an accountant. Then I set a sealed envelope on top, the one Ms. Larkin had prepared, and I rested my palm on it. I already made my decisions, I said. My accounts are locked, a report has been filed, and my house is now held in a trust that you cannot sell, borrow against, or sign away. Clara's smile vanished so fast it looked like a mask being yanked off. Michael stared at the envelope as if it might bite him. Clara's voice came out thinner. You did what? She said, and for the first time I heard fear underneath her control. I did not raise my voice. I said, I protected myself before you could finish what you started. Clara stared at the envelope like it was an insult. Then she forced a small laugh that sounded thin against the quiet dining room. Judy, she said, you cannot just lock your family out. Michael's eyes were still on the papers, and his face looked caught between disbelief and shame. I kept my palm on the envelope, not to protect it from being snatched, but to remind myself that my hands belonged to me. I said, I did not lock my family out. I locked opportunists out. Clara's cheeks flushed, and for the first time her voice lost that polished softness. That is a nasty thing to say, she snapped. We have been trying to help you. You are 78 years old. You live alone. You could fall. You could forget. You could leave the stove on. I watched her list fears like she was reading bullet points from a flyer. and I realized she was not afraid for me. She was afraid of losing access. Michael finally spoke, his voice low. Mom, did you really file a report? I looked at him, and my chest tightened with something that felt like grief wrapped in anger. Yes, I said. Because someone attempted to change my banking access without my permission. Someone scheduled a senior living tour in my name without my consent. Someone printed documents to sell my home before even asking if I wanted to leave it. Clara leaned forward, her fingers pressing into the edge of her folder. We were not selling your home, she insisted. It was just an estimate. It was planning. I tapped the page with the photos of my living room window and my flower bed. You do not estimate a house you do not intend to use, I said. Michael's shoulders slumped, and he stared down at the table as if he could sink through it. Clara shifted tactics, smoothing her tone, turning it almost sweet. Judy, she said, think about Lily. Do you want to put stress on the family? Do you want Lily to see conflict? The word Lily was supposed to soften me, but it only sharpened my focus. I turned my head slightly toward the staircase, where I could hear faint water running. Bath time upstairs, my granddaughter in the next room to a war she did not deserve. I lowered my voice. That is exactly why I am doing this, I said. Because Lily does not deserve to grow up thinking love means control. Michael lifted his eyes. Mom, he whispered, I did not mean for it to go this far. I held his gaze and kept my voice steady. It went this far the moment you let someone speak to me like I was not family, and you stayed silent, I said. It went this far the moment you decided my home was a financial plan. Clara's eyes flashed. You were not invited because you always make things about you, she said, and the bitterness in her voice made the truth visible. You act like a martyr, and Michael ends up cleaning up after your feelings. I nodded once slow. Thank you, I said. That is the clearest thing you have said all week. Michael flinched as if he had been slapped by a sentence, not a hand. He opened his mouth, then closed it, because he could not deny what he had heard. I slid my folder closer to myself, gathered the bank log and the enlarged photo, and placed them back inside neatly. Then I picked up the sealed envelope and held it in my hand without opening it. You do not need to read this, I said. It is done. My medical decisions are assigned to someone who will follow my wishes. My finances are secured. My house is protected. Clara's lips tightened. And what about us? She asked, and that single word proved everything. I looked at her and answered in the same calm tone I used when I paid bills and buried my husband and raised my son alone. You get what you earned, I said. Respect gets access. Manipulation gets distance. Michael swallowed hard. Mom, he said, are you cutting us off? I shook my head. I am cutting off control, I said. Lily will not lose her grandmother because adults cannot behave. I will call her. I will send her cards. I will show up for her school events when I am invited like family, not managed like a task. Clara's expression hardened. You cannot just do whatever you want, she said. We are her parents. I did not argue. I did not threaten. I said, and I am her grandmother, and I will not be used as leverage. Michael's eyes filled in a way that made him look younger, like the boy with missing teeth in my photo frame. Mom, he said, I am sorry. The words came out small, but they were the first honest thing he had offered me in a long time. I nodded once. I believe you are sorry, I said. But being sorry does not repair what you allowed. I stood, smoothing my coat as if I was leaving a meeting, not a family dinner. Clara pushed her chair back slightly, as if she wanted to block me again the way she blocked my porch. Michael did not move. I looked at him one last time. If you want a relationship with me, you will talk to me without her translating my life, I said. If you want me in your home, you will not treat me like a problem to solve. And if anyone touches my accounts again, the next call will not be to you. It will be to the bank and the proper authorities. I turned toward the hallway, and as I reached the door, I heard Lily laugh upstairs, bright and unaware. I paused long enough to breathe. Then I left quietly, because the loudest thing I could do in that house was walk out with my dignity still intact. The drive home felt longer than the 6 miles it really was, not because traffic was heavy, but because my thoughts were. The streetlights blinked on one by one, and the neighborhood looked the way it always had, trimmed lawns and quiet porches, as if families inside those houses were sitting at tables being kind to each other. When I pulled into my driveway, my own little house greeted me with a single porch light and the steady silhouette of the maple tree I planted the year Michael started kindergarten. I stood for a moment with my keys in my hand, listening to the hush, and I realized I was not lonely in the way Clara had tried to label me. I was alone, yes, but I was not abandoned by myself. Inside, I hung my coat carefully, the same way I always did, and I walked into the kitchen where the single white rose still waited by the sink. I filled the glass with fresh water and trimmed the stem with a sharp knife, clean and precise, the way my husband once taught me, and I watched the rose settle upright again as if it had been given permission to breathe. I warmed a bowl of soup, sat at my table, and ate slowly without the television, without noise, letting the quiet feel like mine instead of something to fear. On the corner of the table my folder lay closed now, not because the problem was solved forever, but because I had done what I could do in the moment. I had secured my accounts. I had documented what happened. I had put my wishes in writing. I had drawn a line without shouting. That night, I slept deeper than I had in days, and when I woke, sunlight was pouring through the curtains like nothing bad had ever happened. I made coffee and opened my notebook to the first page, rereading the sentence I wrote. Before Tuesday, I will not argue with people who benefit from misunderstanding me. Then I turned to a fresh page and wrote another. I will live as if I belong to my own life. Around noon my phone rang. Michael. I stared at his name a moment, then answered. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual defensiveness. Mom, he said, are you home? I said yes. He hesitated, and then he said, I am outside. My heart tightened, not with hope exactly, but with the old reflex to open a door. I walked to the front window and saw his car at the curb. He stepped out slowly, no Clara, no Lily, just him, hands in his pockets like he did not know where to put them anymore. I opened the door and stood on my porch without inviting him in right away. The same porch where my life had been reduced to a sentence days earlier. Michael looked older than 45 in the daylight. His eyes were tired, and there was something fragile about the way he held himself. Mom, he said, I am sorry. I waited, because apology without understanding is just noise. He swallowed. I did not realize how far it had gone, he said. I thought we were planning. Clara kept saying you would not want to deal with it. She said you'd get overwhelmed. He looked down at the steps. I should have stopped it. I should have stopped her. The word her came out like a confession. I did not soften. I did not harden. I said, Michael, you did not just fail to stop her. You participated. He nodded, and his eyes filled, but he did not wipe them away. I know, he said. I did it because it was easier to let her lead than to argue, and because I was scared. Scared of what? I asked. He exhaled shakily. Scared that I would have to take care of everything alone, he said. Scared that if something happened to you, I would not know what to do. Scared that I would fail you. The honesty of it cut through me, not because it excused him, but because it sounded like my son again, the boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms and ask if the house would blow away. I held the doorframe and said, being scared does not give you the right to take my choices. He nodded. I know, he whispered. I told Clara we need to step back. She is furious. She said you turned me against her. He lifted his eyes to mine. But Mom, you did not turn me against her. You opened my eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, plain and slightly crumpled. I brought copies of everything, he said. The emails, the drafts, the account screenshots. I should have given them to you when you asked. I took the envelope without rushing. Thank you, I said. He stood there like he wanted to say more, like he wanted me to pull him back into my arms and promise it would all be fine. But I did not do that. I said, if you want to rebuild trust, you start by respecting my boundaries even when it is inconvenient. He nodded slowly. I understand. Then his voice cracked slightly. Can I see you again soon? He asked. Not with Clara. Just me. I looked at him, and I let myself feel the truth of the moment. I still loved my son. Love does not disappear because someone disappoints you. Love changes shape. It becomes careful. It becomes conditional. It becomes something you hold with both hands instead of giving away without thought. I said, we will talk. That is what I can promise right now. Michael nodded, relief and sadness mixing on his face. Before he turned to leave, he said, Lily asked about you. She made another card. I felt a sting behind my eyes, and I kept my voice steady. Tell her I love her, I said. Tell her grandma will call tonight. He nodded, then walked back to his car, moving slower than when he arrived. When he drove away, I stood on my porch and watched the maple leaves shift in the breeze. I went back inside and took Lily's old card out of my purse, the one Clara had tried to take from me. and I placed it on my refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a tiny sunflower. Then I sat at my kitchen table and wrote Lily a letter in my neat handwriting, telling her simple truths a child could hold, that Grandma loved her, that Grandma was proud of her, that Grandma would always be her grandma no matter what adults argued about. Later, when the sun began to dip, my phone rang again, and this time it was a small voice. "Grandma," Lily said softly, like she had been waiting all day. I closed my eyes and smiled, letting the warmth of her voice fill the space Clara had tried to make empty. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. "I am right here."